The wind screamed like a dying animal across the frozen plains of Felines. Snow fell so thick that Una could not see more than 2 meters beyond her cabin window. She had been on this planet for 8 months now, and she had never seen a storm this bad. Her small cabin shook with each gust of wind. The walls were made of reinforced steel, built to survive the harsh winters of this ice world. But tonight, even the cabin seemed afraid. The lights flickered twice. The heating system made strange sounds. Una pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders and tried to focus on her work. She was a scientist. The Terran Science Division had sent her here to study the strange crystal formations that grew beneath the ice. These crystals were unlike anything found on Earth or any other human world. They glowed with a soft blue light and seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. Una had spent months collecting samples and writing reports. It was lonely work, but she did not mind. She had always preferred the company of her research to the company of other people. The temperature outside had dropped to -80 degrees. Her computer screen displayed the warning in bright red letters. At this temperature, exposed skin would freeze in less than 30 seconds. Even the native animals would struggle to survive. Una felt a small twist of worry in her stomach. She thought about the creatures she had seen from her window over the past months. The Felines. They were beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Large feline beings, covered in thick silver-white fur that sparkled like fresh snow under sunlight. They walked on 4 legs most of the time, but Una had seen them stand on 2 when they wanted to reach something high. Their eyes were golden, bright, and intelligent. The Science Division had classified them as primitive creatures, not yet ready for contact with humans. Una was supposed to observe them from a distance and nothing more, but Una had watched them closely. She had seen the way they cared for their young. She had seen them work together to hunt the large ice fish that lived in the frozen lakes. She had seen them play in the snow, chasing each other and tumbling like children. There was nothing primitive about them. Una had written this in her reports, but the Science Division had ignored her observations. A loud scratching sound made Una jump from her chair. Her heart beat fast as she turned toward the door. The sound came again, louder this time. Something was outside. Something was trying to get in. Una walked slowly toward the door. Her hand shook as she reached for the control panel. Every rule she had learned told her to stay inside. Do not open the door. Do not make contact. Report any unusual activity and wait for instructions. These were the protocols. These were the laws, but the scratching continued. And then she heard something else. A sound that was not the wind. A sound that was almost like crying. Una pressed the button to open the small viewing window in the door. What she saw made her forget every rule she had ever learned. 20 Velari huddled together in the snow. Their beautiful silver fur was covered in ice. Their bodies pressed against each other for warmth, but it was not enough. The smallest ones, the children, were in the center of the group. The adults had formed a circle around them, trying to protect them from the cold. But Una could see that they were all shaking. They were all dying. At the front of the group stood the largest Velari she had ever seen. He was massive, his shoulders broad and powerful. A dark stripe ran from his forehead down to his nose, marking him as different from the others. His golden eyes looked directly at Una through the small window. There was no fear in those eyes, only something that looked like hope. Una's hand moved to the door control without her permission. Her mind screamed at her to stop. If she opened this door, she would break the most important rule of her mission. She would lose her job. She might even go to prison. The Science Division did not forgive those who made contact with protected species. But those eyes, those golden, hopeful eyes, the door slid open. A blast of frozen air hit Una like a punch. She stepped back, gasping at the cold. For a moment, nothing happened. The Valari stared at her. She stared at them. The wind continued to howl. Then the large male, the one with the dark stripe, took a step forward. He moved slowly, carefully, as if he understood that this moment was important. He stopped at the doorway and looked at Yuna. He seemed to be asking permission. Yuna stepped aside and gestured with her hand. "Come in. Please, come in." The male entered first. He was so large that he had to duck his head to fit through the door. Behind him came the others, one by one. The mothers carried their children in their mouths, gentle despite their sharp teeth. The old ones moved slowly, their joints stiff from the cold. The young adults helped them, supporting their weight. 20 Valari filled Yuna's small cabin. They covered every space. They lay on her floor, her bed, her table, her chairs. The room was suddenly full of fur and golden eyes and the smell of wet animal. Yuna pressed herself against the wall, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. The door closed automatically behind the last Valari. The heating system hummed louder, working hard to warm so many bodies. Slowly, the ice on their fur began to melt. Water dripped onto the floor. The shaking stopped. The large male did not lie down like the others. He stood in the center of the room, his eyes fixed on Yuna. He was watching her, studying her. Yuna felt like a small mouse being observed by a very large, very intelligent cat. But he did not attack. He did not threaten. He simply watched. One of the young Valari, barely more than a baby, crawled across the floor toward Yuna. Its mother made a worried sound, but she was too tired to move. The baby stopped at Yuna's feet and looked up at her with huge golden eyes. Then, very slowly, it pressed its small head against her leg. Yuna felt tears burn in her eyes. She knelt down and placed her hand on the baby's head. The fur was soft, softer than anything she had ever touched. The baby made a small purring sound and closed its eyes. When Yuna looked up, the large male was still watching. But something had changed in his expression. The hope was still there, but now there was something else to respect. Outside, the storm continued to rage. But inside the small cabin, 20 Valari and one human waited together for morning. The cabin had never felt so small. Yuna sat on the only empty corner of floor she could find, her back pressed against the cold metal wall. Around her, 20 Valari breathed in slow, tired rhythms. Their bodies covered every surface. Their silver fur caught the dim light and made the whole room seem to glow. Yuna could not sleep. Her mind was too full of questions and fears. What would happen when the science division learned what she had done? Would they send soldiers to arrest her? Would they hurt these creatures who had only been trying to survive? She pushed these thoughts away and tried to focus on the present moment. Right now, everyone was alive. Right now, everyone was safe. That was enough. The large male with the dark stripe had not rested like the others. He sat near the door, his golden eyes open and alert. Every time Yuna moved, his head turned to follow her. She had started calling him Taio in her mind. It was not a Valari name, of course. She had no idea what the Valari called themselves or each other. But he needed a name, and Taio felt right somehow. Strong and quiet, like him. As the hours passed, Yuna began to notice things about her guests. The way the mothers kept their children close, their tails wrapped around the small bodies. The way the young adults took turns watching the door and windows, always ready to protect the group. The way the old ones were given the warmest spots near the heating vents. This was not the behavior of simple animals. This was a family. A community. Around midnight, something changed. One of the young Valari, a small female who looked like she was between childhood and adulthood, began to shake. At first, Yuna thought she was just cold. But the shaking grew worse. The young one's body trembled so hard that her teeth made clicking sounds. Her mother pressed against her, trying to share warmth, but it was not enough. Why Una moved without thinking. She grabbed her emergency thermal blanket from the storage box under her bed. It was designed to hold heat inside, to keep a human alive in the worst conditions. She had only one, and she had been saving it for herself. But right now, this young Valari needed it more. She approached slowly, not wanting to scare the mother. The mother watched her with nervous eyes, her body tense. But she did not attack. She did not even growl. She seemed to understand that Una was trying to help. Una wrapped the silver blanket around the young Valari. The material crinkled loudly in the quiet room. Several of the sleeping Valari woke up and watched with curious eyes. The young one shaking began to slow. Her breathing became easier. Her mother made a sound that Una had never heard before. It was soft and musical, like a song without words. The sound was full of emotion, gratitude, relief, love. Una felt something wet on her cheek and realized she was crying. Heavy footsteps made her turn around. Taiho had crossed the cabin. He stood directly behind her, so close that she could feel the heat from his massive body. Una's heart jumped with fear. He was so large. His claws were so sharp. If he wanted to hurt her, she could not stop him. But Taiho did not hurt her. Instead, he lowered his great head until his face was level with hers. His golden eyes looked deep into her brown ones. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. Two different species. Two different worlds. Yet somehow, in that moment, Una felt like they understood each other perfectly. Then Taiho did something extraordinary. He pressed his forehead against hers. His fur was warm and soft against her skin. He held the position for several seconds, breathing slowly. Una could feel his heartbeat, strong and steady, vibrating through his skull into hers. The cabin felt completely silent. Every Valari was awake now, watching this moment. Una did not know what it meant, but she knew it was important. She stayed perfectly still, afraid to break whatever spell had been cast. Finally, Taiho pulled back. He made a low rumbling sound in his chest. It was not a growl. It was something gentler, something that sounded almost like a purr. Then he returned to his position by the door and sat down again. The other Valari seemed to relax after that. They lowered their heads and closed their eyes. The tension that had filled the room since they arrived finally melted away. Una realized that Taiho had just done something very meaningful. He had accepted her. He had told his people that she was safe, that she was friend, not enemy. The rest of the night passed slowly. Una tried to stay awake, but exhaustion eventually claimed her. She fell asleep sitting up, her head resting against the wall. When she woke, it was because something warm was pressed against her side. The baby Valari had crawled over to her during the night. It was curled up against her hip, its small head resting on her leg. Its mother lay nearby, watching but not worried. She had allowed her child to sleep next to the human. She had decided to trust Una with her most precious treasure. Una looked around the cabin. Most of the Valari were still sleeping. The storm outside had grown quieter, though the wind still howled. Weak morning light was beginning to filter through the frost-covered windows. They had survived the night, but one Valari was not sleeping. Taiho sat in the exact same position as before, his eyes fixed on Una. She wondered if he had slept at all. She wondered if he had spent the whole night watching over both his people and her. Their eyes met across the crowded room. Taiho's expression was impossible to read. But Una thought she saw something there that had not been present before. A decision. A plan. Whatever was going to happen next, Taiho had already decided what it would be. Outside, the first pale rays of the sun began to touch the frozen plains of Felines. The storm was ending. Soon, the Valari would leave. They would return to wherever they had come from, and Yuna would be alone again. Or so she thought. She had no idea that her life was about to change forever. She had no idea that opening her door had been the first step on a path that would lead her farther than she had ever imagined. She had no idea that the large male with the dark stripe had already made his choice. He had chosen her. Morning came slowly to Kellanine. The pale blue sun rose over the frozen mountains, painting the snow in shades of silver and gold. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a world that looked clean and new. Yuna opened her eyes and found her cabin empty. Almost empty. The 20 Valari who had filled every corner of her small home were gone. They had left some time during the last hours of the night, slipping away as quietly as they had arrived. The only sign that they had ever been there was the wet patches on the floor where the ice in their fur had melted, but one Valari remained. Taiho sat by the door, exactly where he had been all night. His golden eyes were fixed on Yuna, watching her wake up with an expression she could not understand. He had not left with the others. He had chosen to stay. Yuna stood slowly, her muscles stiff from sleeping in an uncomfortable position. She looked at Taiho and felt a strange mixture of fear and curiosity. Why was he still here? What did he want? She walked to her small kitchen area and prepared some food for herself. Her supplies were simple. Protein bars, dried fruit, water that she had to heat because everything on this planet was frozen. As she ate, she could feel Taiho's eyes following her every movement. He was studying her, learning her habits, understanding how humans lived. When she finished eating, Yuna approached him. She kept her movements slow and careful, the way she would approach any wild animal. But Taiho was not wild, she realized. He was simply different. Different did not mean dangerous. She stopped a meter away from him and sat down on the floor. This put her at his eye level. She did not want to look down at him. She wanted to meet him as an equal. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Yuna noticed details she had missed before. The way his dark stripes seemed to shimmer in the morning light. The small scars on his ears from old fights. The intelligence in his golden eyes, sharp and deep as any human she had ever met. Then, Taiho moved. He raised one massive paw and pointed at himself. The gesture was clear and deliberate. He was indicating himself. Then he pointed at Yuna. Then he pointed at the door. Beyond the door, through the window, Yuna could see the distant mountains. The Valari homeland. The place where Taiho's people lived. Yuna's heart began to beat faster. Was he asking what she thought he was asking? Taiho repeated the gestures. Himself, her, the door. The mountains thought he wanted her to come with him. Yuna shook her head slowly. It was not because she did not want to go. It was because she could not believe what was happening. First contact between humans and Valari was not supposed to happen like this. There should be diplomats and scientists and careful protocols. There should be months of planning and preparation. Not one woman in a small cabin, being invited to follow a stranger into the unknown. But then Taiho did something that changed everything. He opened his mouth and spoke. The word was rough and broken, clearly difficult for his mouth to form. But it was unmistakably human language. A word he had learned from listening to her communicate with her computer, from monitoring her calls to the science division over the past months. He said, "Come." Yuna forgot how to breathe. The Valari were not supposed to be able to speak. They were not supposed to be intelligent enough to learn human language. Everything the science division had told her about these creatures was wrong. She stared at Taiho, her mind racing. How long had the Valari been watching the humans? How much had they learned? What else did they know? Taiho seemed to sense her shock. He made the low rumbling sound again, the one that was almost like a purr. It seemed to be his way of saying that everything was okay, that she should not be afraid. He spoke again. This time, more words came. They were broken and awkward, but Yuna understood them. We watch. Long time. You different. You kind. Tears filled Yuna's eyes. The Valari had been studying humans just as humans had been studying them. They had been learning and waiting, trying to decide if they could trust these strange beings who had come to their world. And they had chosen her. Out of all the humans they could have approached, they had chosen the one who had opened her door during a deadly storm. Yuna thought about everything she would lose if she said yes. Her career, her reputation, her connection to human society. The science division would call her a traitor. They would say she had contaminated an alien culture. They might even claim that she had damaged the Valari by exposing them to human contact. But she also thought about what she might gain: knowledge, understanding, chance to be part of something bigger than herself. A chance to show that humans and aliens could work together, could trust each other, could be friends. She looked into Taiho's golden eyes and made her decision. Yuna stood and walked to her storage locker. She pulled out her survival pack and began filling it with supplies. Water purification tablets, emergency rations, thermal gear, medical supplies, everything she might need for a long journey across the ice. When she turned back to Taiho, he was standing too. His tail moved slowly from side to side. It took Yuna a moment to realize what this meant. It was not a sign of anger or fear. It was happiness. He was happy that she had said yes. Yuna walked to the door and placed her hand on the control panel. She hesitated for just a moment. Once she opened this door, once she stepped outside with Taiho, there was no going back. Her old life would be over. A new life would begin. She pressed the button. The door slid open, revealing a world of endless white. The cold air rushed in, but Yuna was ready for it this time. She pulled her thermal hood over her head and stepped outside. Taiho walked beside her, matching his pace to hers. The snow crunched under their feet. The sun shone down on them, making the ice sparkle like diamonds. Ahead of them, the mountains waited. Yuna did not know what she would find there. She did not know if she would survive the journey. She did not know if she was making the biggest mistake of her life or the best decision she had ever made. But she knew one thing for certain. She was not alone anymore. And that made all the difference. The journey to the mountains took 3 days. 3 days of endless walking through snow and ice. 3 days of bitter cold that cut through Yuna's thermal suit like knives. 3 days that nearly killed her. On the first day, they had to cross a frozen ravine. The ice looked solid, but Yuna's weight was different from a Valari's weight. Halfway across, the ice cracked beneath her feet. She fell through into the freezing water below. The cold was so intense that her body stopped working immediately. She could not move her arms. She could not kick her legs. She began to sink. Taiho moved faster than she had ever seen any creature move. He reached into the water with his powerful jaws and grabbed her pack strap. With one mighty pull, he dragged her out of the water and onto solid ice. She lay there gasping, her body shaking so hard that she bit her tongue. Blood filled her mouth, but she barely noticed. All she could feel was the cold. Taiho did not hesitate. He lay down on top of her, covering her small human body with his massive form. His thick fur was like a warm blanket. His body heat seeped into her frozen limbs. He stayed like that for 2 hours, not moving, not eating, just keeping her alive with his warmth. When Yuna could finally stand again, she looked at Taiho with new eyes. He had saved her life. He had risked himself to rescue a creature he had only known for one night. This was not the behavior of a primitive animal. This was the behavior of someone who cared. On the second day, the temperature dropped suddenly and without warning. One moment, the air was cold, but manageable. The next moment, it was colder than anything Yuna had ever experienced. Her thermal suit's heating system failed. The battery simply could not produce enough power to fight this kind of cold. Yuna felt her fingers begin to go numb. Then her toes. Then her face. She knew what was happening. She was dying. Slowly, piece by piece, her body was shutting down. Taiho made a sound she had never heard before. It was loud and long, echoing across the frozen plains. A call. A signal. Within minutes, 5 other Velari appeared from nowhere. They were scouts, Yuna realized later. They had been following at a distance, watching over Taiho and his strange human companion. At Taiho's command, they surrounded Yuna. They pressed their warm bodies against her from all sides. They walked like this for hours, a moving wall of fur and heat, carrying Yuna through the deadly cold dot. By the time they reached the mountains, Yuna was too exhausted to feel amazed. But some part of her mind recorded everything she saw. The great caves that opened in the mountainside like doorways. The smooth walls that had been carved by tools, not nature. The soft blue light that came from crystals embedded in the stone. The same crystals she had been sent to study. This was not a simple animal den. This was a city. The caves went deep into the mountain. The deeper they went, the warmer it became. Soon, Yuna was able to remove her thermal hood. She looked around with wide eyes at the wonder surrounding her. Velari were everywhere. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They walked through tunnels that connected different chambers. They gathered in large spaces that seemed to be markets or meeting places. They cared for their young in warm, comfortable dens. And everywhere Yuna looked, she saw signs of civilization. There was art on the walls. Beautiful images carved into the crystal and stone, showing scenes of hunting and celebration and history. There were tools, simple but effective, made from bone and crystal and the metal that could be found deep in the mountains. There was writing, a complex system of symbols that covered certain walls. Like ancient libraries. The science division had been completely wrong. The Velari were not primitive. They were a civilization, a culture, a people. Taiho led Yuna through the caves until they reached a large chamber at the center of the mountain. Here, the ceiling was so high that it disappeared into darkness. Crystals covered every surface, filling the space with soft blue light. In the middle of the chamber, on a raised platform made of polished stone, sat the oldest Velari Yuna had ever seen. Her fur was pure white, with no trace of the silver that marked younger Velari. Her eyes were clouded with age, but they turned toward Yuna with sharp awareness. She was thin and frail, her body worn by many years. But her presence was powerful. The other Velari around her lowered their heads in respect. This was the elder, the leader. The voice of the Velari people. Taiho approached the elder and made a series of sounds and gestures. A conversation was happening, Yuna realized. A language she could not understand. The elder listened carefully, her clouded eyes moving back and forth between Taiho and Yuna. Finally, the elder spoke. But she did not speak in the Velari language. She spoke in human words. Her voice was old and rough, but her words were clear. She had been learning human language for years. Yuna understood now. The Velari had been preparing for this moment for a long time. "You opened your door," the elder said. Others did not. "We watched. We waited. We needed to know if humans could be trusted. You showed us." Yuna did not know what to say. She bowed her head, the only gesture of respect she could think of. The elder continued. "Our world is dying. The crystals that warm our caves, that light our homes, that protect us from the cold of space, they are failing. We do not know how to fix them, but we have seen your machines. We have heard your communications. You have knowledge we do not have." The elder's clouded eyes seemed to look directly into Yuna's soul. "We need your help. Your people's help. We are asking you to speak for us, to tell the humans that we are here. That we are people. That we deserve to live. Yuna felt the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. This was why the Valari had been watching. This was why they had learned human language. This was why Taiho had brought her here. They were not primitive creatures who needed protection from human contact. They were a dying civilization reaching out for help, and they had chosen her to be their voice. Yuna looked at Taiho. He was watching her with those golden eyes, waiting for her answer. She thought about everything she had seen. The art, the writing, the love between parents and children, the courage of the scouts who had saved her life, the wisdom of the elder who had swallowed her pride and asked a stranger for help. These were not animals. These were people. And they were asking her to save them. Yuna straightened her back and faced the elder. "I will speak for you," she said. "I will tell the humans everything. And I will not stop until they listen." The elder smiled. It was a strange expression on a face covered in fur, but it was unmistakably a smile. "Then, you are one of us now," she said. "Welcome home." Yuna's report caused an explosion across human space. She sent it through the emergency communication system in her cabin, which she returned to briefly with a group of Valari escorts. The message was long and detailed, filled with everything she had learned about the Valari people, their civilization, their crisis, and their request for help. The reaction was immediate and loud. Some officials called her a criminal. She had broken the first law of protected species contact. She had contaminated an alien culture. She should be arrested and brought back to Earth for trial. These voices were angry and afraid. They did not like change. They did not like surprises. They wanted the universe to stay simple and easy to understand. Other officials called her a hero. She had made peaceful contact with an intelligent alien species. She had prevented what might have been a tragic misunderstanding. She had shown that humans could be trusted, that they could be compassionate, that they could be good. These voices were excited and hopeful. They saw possibilities where others saw problems. The debate continued for months. Politicians argued. Scientists studied. News programs discussed every detail of Yuna's story until everyone in human space knew her name. Some people loved her. Some people hated her. No one could ignore her. During all this time, Yuna stayed on Kellanine. She lived among the Valari, learning their language and their customs. She ate their food and slept in their caves. She taught them about human technology and listened to their ancient stories. Every day, she fell more in love with these strange, beautiful people who had opened their hearts to her. And every day, she spent time with Taiho. The large male had become her constant companion. He taught her how to walk on ice without falling. He showed her the secret places in the mountains where hot springs kept small gardens alive. He told her about his people's history, about the wars they had fought, and the peace they had built. His human words grew better with each passing week until he could speak almost as well as Yuna herself. They talked about everything. Their hopes, their fears, their dreams for the future. Yuna learned that Taiho was not just a hunter or a guard. He was a thinker, a leader, someone who cared deeply about his people and worried about what would happen to them. She learned that he had been the one who argued hardest to make contact with humans. Many Valari had wanted to stay hidden, to keep their distance from the strange beings who had come to their world. But Taiho had believed that cooperation was better than isolation. He had believed that humans could be friends, and he had been right. 1 year after Yuna's report, the first official human delegation arrived on Kellanine. There were diplomats and scientists and engineers, all carefully chosen for their open minds and gentle hearts. The Terran government had finally decided to help. Not because they had to, but because it was the right thing to do. The engineers studied the crystals that powered the Valari civilization. They discovered that these were not just energy sources, but an ancient planetary defense system built millions of years ago by a species that had long since disappeared. The system was failing, slowly losing power after countless centuries of operation. Without repair, Calanine would become uninhabitable within 50 years. But human technology could fix it. Human knowledge could save it. Within months, a joint team of humans and Valari was working together to restore the crystal network. It was not easy. There were misunderstandings and mistakes. There were moments when both sides wanted to give up. But they kept trying because they had learned to trust each other. On the day the repairs were completed, the whole planet celebrated. The crystals glowed brighter than they had in centuries. The caves filled with warm light. The Valari sang songs of gratitude that echoed through the mountains. And the humans who had come to help found themselves welcomed not as visitors, but as family. Una stood at the edge of the central chamber, watching the celebration with tears in her eyes. She had done it. She had spoken for the Valari, and the humans had listened. Two peoples who might have been enemies were now allies. Two civilizations who might have destroyed each other were now working together. The future was no longer dark and frightening. The future was bright. Taiho appeared beside her. He had grown even larger in the past year, his body filling out with strength and confidence. The dark stripe on his face seemed to glow in the crystal light. He was beautiful, Una thought. Beautiful and brave and good. The official delegation had gathered nearby, watching the celebration. Cameras recorded everything. This moment would be seen across all of human space. This moment would become history. Taiho stepped forward and raised his voice so everyone could hear. This human came to our world as a stranger, he said. His words were smooth now, confident and clear. She was sent to study our planet. She was told to stay away from us. She was warned not to make contact. But when we came to her door, dying from the cold, she did not follow her orders. She opened her door. She let us in. She saved our lives. The crowd was silent, human and Valari alike, all listening. Later, she followed me across the ice. She nearly died twice. But she did not turn back. She walked into our home. She listened to our story. She agreed to speak for us when no one else could. Taiho turned to face Una directly. His golden eyes were soft with emotion. In my culture, when someone saves your life, you owe them a debt. When someone risks their life for your people, they become one of your people. And when someone shows you this kind of courage and kindness, there is only one response. He moved closer to her. The camera zoomed in. The crowd held its breath. She is my bonded, Taiho announced, using a Valari word that meant something deeper than human marriage, something closer to two souls becoming one. She opened her door when she did not have to. She walked through ice and storm when it would have been safer to stay home. She spoke for us when no one else would. I have chosen her, and I hope she will choose me. Una could not speak. Her throat was tight with emotion. She looked at this alien being who had become her closest friend, her partner, her home. She thought about everything they had been through together. The storm, the journey, the long nights talking about the future. She thought about what it meant to be human. Not the science or the technology or the great achievements, but the simple things, the important things. The willingness to help someone in need. The courage to reach out across the darkness. The ability to love someone different from yourself. That was what made humanity special. Not their ships or their weapons or their power. Their hearts. Their doors. And their willingness to open them. Una stepped forward and pressed her forehead against Taiho's. The same gesture he had made that first night in her cabin. She heard gasps from the crowd. She heard the click of cameras. She did not care. I choose you too, she whispered. Taiho made the rumbling purr sound that meant happiness. His tail moved slowly from side to side. Around them, Valari and humans began to cheer. Later, people would call this the moment that changed everything. The moment when two species became one family. The moment when the galaxy grew a little smaller and a little warmer. But for Yuna, it was simpler than that. It was just a woman and the being she loved, standing together in the light, ready to face whatever came next. Together. That was the human story in the end. Not conquering, not ruling, not dominating, just opening doors and walking through them together.